Hotep, everybody. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show. It is Sunday, June 9th, 2024, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. We have a fantastic, exciting show planned today, and I'm going to deal with this nonsense that happened early in the week and this controversy from Representative Byron Donalds, Black Republican from Florida. We're going to talk about Representative Byron Donalds and Candace Owens are wrong about Black families, Jim Crow, man in the house rule, and welfare. Okay. And some of you all saw posted about this on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and my personal page, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. So we have the flyer right here as well. You can check out. Okay. So I saw Byron Donalds on Joanne Reed's show on MSNBC, The Readout. I saw him on the Reverend Al Sharpton show on Saturday, June 8th. And so I saw his original comments as well. Roland Martin talked about him on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I was on Roland's show on Friday. We didn't get to it. He talked about it like the day before, something like that. And the reason why I wanted to deal with this is because some of these same Black conservative lies Candace Owens spewed on the Breakfast Club show with Charlemagne the God, and nobody there pushed back on her. This was back in March 2024. You know, we dealt with that here on the show also. I eviscerated her arguments here on the African History Network show and provided evidence to document what I was talking about. All right, so we're going to look at video of what Byron Donalds actually said, because he said people were lying about what he said, misquoting what he said, etc. Okay, and then we're going to go through and provide this history lesson and show why he said what he said, as well as things Candace Owens has been saying and other Black conservatives, why what they are saying is false. Okay, why what they are saying is false. So one of the first articles, and when I posted about this on Instagram, my Instagram page, Michael Imhotep, I read some articles that talked about this also. Like this is a good one from Politico.com. Byron Donalds expresses nostalgia for the Jim Crow era when, quote, the Black family was together, when the Black family was together. Now, he didn't say he wanted Jim Crow back. He didn't say Jim Crow was good for African Americans, but he implied that African American families were together during Jim Crow, and he implied somehow the Jim Crow era was better. And now the fake argument that these conservatives are trying to make is, especially African American conservatives, what they try to do is say that the policies of the Great Society program from Lyndon Baines Johnson, these policies harmed African American families, and therefore somehow African American families were better prior to these policies. Okay, so anti-poverty policies, welfare, different things like this. This is the argument that they try to make. Okay, and here's I'm going to go back to, I'll pull up the flyer once again that we have for today's show. This is straight out of the Black conservatives handbook. Okay, because they all make the same argument, and they usually don't provide any evidence to document what it is that they're saying. This is some of the same things that Candace Owens said on the Breakfast Club, and you hear other Black conservatives say similar idiotic things. They don't provide evidence to back it up. Okay, so let's look at this article here from Politico.com. Byron Donalds expresses nostalgia for the Jim Crow era when the Black family was together. The Trump surrogate's comments made during a Black voter outreach event in Philadelphia, a Black voter, this was a Republican Black voter outreach program effort that took place in Philadelphia, when he made these remarks that have gone viral and make he and these other Black Republicans look stupid. It sparked outrage from Democrats, but just outrage from African Americans in general. Now, this is a picture from the event. Now, this is Wesley Hunt, Black Republican from Texas, and Byron Donalds, Black Republican from Florida. Both of them just happen to be married to white women. Okay, I just wanted you to understand this. And you know, Roland and I, when I'm on Roland Martin Unfiltered, sometimes we'll go back and forth talking about these African American Republicans married to white women, and I think some people are missing my argument. The argument I'm making, I'm not saying somebody African American suffers from self-hatred because they marry somebody white or they marry outside of their race. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, and I've been very clear on this, is when you exhibit anti-Black behavior, when you consistently vote on policies and advocate for policies that harm African Americans, and you vote against policies that are good for African Americans, when you have a history of doing that, when you suffer from anti-Black behavior and sentiments, oftentimes that anti-Blackness manifests itself in other ways. One of those other ways could also be in who you choose to marry, and marrying outside of your race, especially if you exclusively date white women. Okay. And also if you marry a white conservative that works in opposition to African Americans and advocates for policies in opposition to African Americans as well. Okay. For like Byron Donalds' wife does, as well as Jenny Thomas, Clarence Thomas' wife. Okay. Now, the other thing is all of these Black Republican, all these male Black Republicans in the House of Representatives and the one in the Senate. Well, let's just look at the House. Burgess Owens out of Utah, John James out of Detroit, Wesley Hunt out of Texas, Byron Donald out of Florida, and there's one other one because there's 5 in the House. They're all married to white women. Senator Tim Scott, Black Republican from South Carolina, who's in the U.S. Senate, he's engaged to a white woman. Okay? Now, I'm not saying they suffer from anti-Blackness because they're married to white women or engaged to white women. I'm saying that because they suffer from anti-Blackness, you can easily see how they ended up with who they ended up with. That's what I'm saying. Okay, Representative Byron Donalds was on the defensive on Wednesday as Democrats attacked him for comments he made the night before on Tuesday. So this event took place on Tuesday, June 4th in Philadelphia, Tuesday, June 4th, in a gentrified area of Philadelphia, by the way. Okay, as Democrats attacked him for comments he'd made the night before praising Black families under the era of racial segregation in America. Okay, now he said during Jim Crow, the Black family was together, quote unquote. Donald said during a Black GOP outreach event in a gentrifying part of Philadelphia on Tuesday, and he criticized decades-old policies from former President Dwight Eisenhower and Lyndon Baines Johnson for promoting a culture of what they call dependence, promoting a culture of dependence, and saying this made Black people dependent on the government. Now, they don't talk about government subsidies for corporations. They don't talk about government subsidies for white farmers. They don't talk about government subsidies for corporations and Donald Trump's $2 trillion tax cut for corporations. They don't talk about corporate welfare. They don't want to deal with that. Okay. They just want to say, oh, these policies made African Americans dependent. That's false. Quote, during Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people always have been conservative minded, but more black people voted conservatively, end quote. This is what he said. Now, this doesn't make any sense right here, because if you actually understand the history of Jim Crow laws in the South, Jim Crow laws were against African Americans voting, generally speaking. So how would they vote? How were most African Americans voting conservatively when they couldn't vote? See, this is the nonsense that these black Republicans put out. Okay, so let's go and look at the actual video on his Twitter page to actually see what he said. Okay, because we don't want to give the wrong impression of what he said. So I want you to hear what he said. Okay, let's take a look at this. Now, this is his personal Twitter page at Byron Donalds. And this is from, he posted this June 5th. Okay, I think it was June 5th he posted this, because it took place on June 4th. Let's look at this here.
I grew up with my mom. My dad and my mom, things didn't work out. As an adult, I look at my father and I say, bro, I don't know what happened, but you my father and I love you. Wow. I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. Wow. But I'm going to tell you this. Growing up, the one thing I knew I wanted to do, and this is not about my father, this is about what I wanted to do, is I wanted to be a father to myself. Wow. And so one of the things that's actually happening in our culture, which you're now starting to see in our politics, is the reinvigoration of black families with younger black men and black women. And that is also helping to breed the revival of a black middle class in America. You see, during Jim Crow, the black family was together. That's right. During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative, because black people always have been conservative minded, but more black people voted conservatively. And then HEW, Lyndon Johnson, and then you go down that road, and now we are where we are. What's happened in America the last 10 years, and I say it because it's my contemporaries, it's Wesley's contemporaries, you're starting to see more black people be married in homes, raising kids. It's when you home with your wife raising your kids, and then you look at the world, you're saying, now wait a minute, time out. This does not look right. How can I get something to my kids? It goes back to the conversation of generational wealth. Not just having a job, generational wealth. I'm looking at my kids. How can my kids be on my shoulders when they take off in life? That's what's happening.
Okay, so he mentions Jim Crow 3 times, talks about generational wealth. We're going to talk about that because household wealth for African Americans has increased 60% under the Biden-Harris administration. Byron Donalds doesn't want to talk about that. Okay, so he brought up Jim Crow 3 times. Okay, so after that took place, what happened was House Minority Leader Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who understands history because one of his uncles is one of my teachers, Dr. Lyndon Jeffries. House Minority Leader Representative Hakeem Jeffries eviscerated Byron Donalds on the House floor. Here's what. I posted this video on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, and my Instagram page, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. So this is House Minority Leader Representative Hakeem Jeffries, and he understands history because his uncle is one of my teachers, Dr. Lyndon Jeffries. Let's take a look at this.
Come to my attention that a so-called leader has made the factually inaccurate statement that black folks were better off during Jim Crow. That's an outlandish, outrageous, and out-of-pocket observation. We were not better off when a young boy named Emmett Till could be brutally murdered without consequence because of Jim Crow. We were not better off when black women could be sexually assaulted without consequence because of Jim Crow. We were not better off when people could be systematically lynched without consequence because of Jim Crow. We were not better off when children could be denied a high-quality education without consequence because of Jim Crow. We were not better off when people could be denied the right to vote without consequence because of Jim Crow. How dare you make such an ignorant observation? You better check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Okay, so then he quoted Ice Cube as well. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. So, all right. So that was Representative Hakeem Jeffries as well. And there's been a lot of backlash from this. Representative Jasmine Crockett was on MSNBC this weekend. I think she was on Alex Witt's show on MSNBC. I posted a clip from when Byron Donalds was on Joy and Reid's show, MSNBC. And it didn't go too well for Byron on Joy and Reid. Okay. Here's a clip from this, and this is on our Facebook fan page, also on my YouTube channel. Let me flip over to.
Which creates better people.
Last question, and then I'm going to let you go. Last question. We're out of time, but I'm going to give you one more question. During Jim Crow, could your family have existed? You are in an interracial marriage. Your wife is a white conservative activist. Could your family have existed at all during Jim Crow?
No, it could not, Joy, and we all know that. But that's why I am blessed to live in America today as opposed to America during that time. But we cannot ignore the realities of not having fathers in homes. That is important for black people today and all people today as we move forward for a better America.
We are out of time. What I'm grateful for is that we do not live in the Jim Crow era and that fathers do not face the threat of lynching.
I'm very grateful of that.
Perhaps don't bring up Jim Crow when you're trying to make that example. Representative Byron Donalds, thank you for being here, and we'll be right back.
Okay, so I saw the full interview that Byron did with Joanne Reid, and you see, so I posted this on my Instagram page. I put this caption here. Trump-loving black Republican, and let me see if I can zoom in on this. It won't zoom in. Trump-loving black Republican, Representative Byron Donalds, Republican of Florida, admits he is blessed to live in Joe Biden's America. He said he's blessed to live in America today, right, as opposed to America under Jim Crow. Oh, so you're blessed to live in Joe Biden's America. This is what you're saying. And Joy asked the question, could Byron Donalds' interracial family have existed during Jim Crow? We know the answer is no. If it did exist, he'd be running for his life. Okay, especially in the South. Okay, he'd be running for his life. And so it was a good interview that Joy did.
Which creates better people.
It was a good interview that Joy did. Then Byron went on Reverend Al Sharpton show on Politics Nation, MSNBC. He was on Saturday, June 8th, 2024. Okay. And I posted an excerpt of that clip as well. I'm going to show that to you. Also, thanks for all the birthday wishes, because my birthday was Friday, June 7th. So I've gotten couple of probably 300 birthday wishes on Facebook, and got a few text messages, things like that. So thanks for the birthday wishes, everybody. Appreciate that. I turned 53. Okay, where did the time go? Okay, so here's a clip of Byron on Politics Nation. Here's a clip of Byron Donalds on Politics Nation with Reverend Al Sharpton from Saturday, June 8th, 2004.
We are going to talk about the era, Congressman, and you name a race-based law, then you cannot take race out of the fact Jim Crow was a law against black people. You weren't just talking about the era of Dwight Eisenhower and Harry Truman. You named Jim Crow. There's only one way you could deal with Jim Crow, and that's by race. I mean, look. Look, you and I had mutual friends. People say you're a straight shooter. We may disagree on politics. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. But look, you were born in Brooklyn. You went down into the South, went to Florida State. You have an interracial marriage. You're the congressman of a district that's not a black district. I mean, how can you even live with yourself acting like Jim Crow was a good era or better era for blacks? What happened to you?
Okay, that's real cute. That's real cute. I did not say that. And I'm not going to sit here and have to insinuate that against me, because right now you're lying about what I said. I did say Jim Crow. I did reference it 3 times. That's not to say that it was better. I never said that. Those words never came out of my mouth. When are you going to get that through your skull and everybody else's skull? I never said that. And the difference between me and a lot of other Republicans, I'm not going to sit here.
You said it was better for us.
I'm not going to let you
under Jim Crow to bring families together. Did you say that?
Hakeem Jeffries was lying. The Biden campaign was lying. All right. Go look at my words.
So Byron Donalds sounds like Donald Trump. Everybody's lying on me. People setting me up. The B set me up. He sounds like Donald Trump. Okay. But Donalds is the one who interjected Jim Crow. And they did that for a reason. It's just like when Candace Owens said, oh, we had African Americans had a higher marriage rate during slavery than they do today. Like, you trying to say slavery was a good thing? You want to bring slavery back? So I'm going to go through and dissect these arguments and provide historical evidence to show how these people are lying. Okay. Byron Donalds, Candace Owens, these other black conservatives out here who are running this hustle. They're all reading from the same black conservative playbook. They're all reading from the same black conservative playbook. I understand the playbook. That's how I know what they're about to say. And that's how they all say the same thing. Okay. So let's look at, let's approach it this way. You have them saying things like African Americans had a higher marriage rate prior to the Great Society programs in 1964 and President Lyndon Baines Johnson. And it was these programs, it was the welfare program that pushed African American men out of the homes, things like this. We've all heard variations of this nonsense, right? Okay, so let's look at some evidence. Now, when I did my takedown of Candace Owens, and that video has been viewed over 50,000 times on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, when I did the original video, and then I did a shorter segment dealing with how Candace Owens is wrong about the man in the house rule. That's on our Facebook and YouTube pages. This was one of the articles that I talked about to provide some historical evidence, right? This is a good article from theroot.com. Theroot.com. I'm not a big fan of The Root, but every now and then they do have some good articles. This is an article from June 17th, 2011. June 17th, 2011, by Cynthia Gordy, called Welfare, Fathers and Those Persistent Myths. Welfare, Fathers and Those Persistent Myths. And also when they talked about HEW, That's health, education, and welfare. It's dealing with policies under, the Great Society program from President Lyndon Baines Johnson. We're going to go through and look at some of those Great Society programs as well. Does the state discourage poor fathers from being present in their children's lives? There are the emblematic images like Diane Carroll as a single mother on welfare in the 1974 movie Claudine. Most of us have seen that movie Claudine, co-starring James Earl Jones. She was struggling to hide her boyfriend, James Earl Jones, from the white social worker, okay? Urban legends tell of man in the house rules that prohibit men from living under the same roof as moms who receive public assistance. Between media images, half-truths, and also well-meaning but flawed policies, the belief that the welfare system undermines poor families has been entrenched in the public mind for decades. All of us realize the critical importance of fathers in the home, said Ron Sims, Deputy Secretary of HUD, Housing Urban Development at the time. This is under the Obama administration. Secretary of HUD, he told theroot.com at the time, quote, "We want fathers to understand that they are welcome at our housing authority sites and that we want them there to play meaningful roles in raising their children and supporting the women that they've been with," end quote. Now, clearing up misconceptions. They have this section here in this article. Clearing up misconceptions. Let me scroll down to this right here. A particular fact that those giving the side eye to the American welfare system often trot out is that in 1890, married couples headed 80% of all Black households. Okay, so this is during the Jim Crow era, 1890. This is the same year of the Mississippi State Convention, where they rewrote the Mississippi State Constitution to impose poll taxes and literacy tests, property ownership requirements to be able to vote, to suppress the African American vote. Okay, this is that same year. This is during the Jim Crow era that Byron Donalds said Black families were in the home. See, they all these Black conservatives play from the same playbook. And I've been on panel discussions with them, blew them away because I'm a historian. I know they're lying. Read this article right here from the Washington Post. The Mississippi plan to keep Blacks from voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. We came here to exclude the Negro. This talks about what happened at the Mississippi State Constitution. This article is from May 1st, 2021 by Ronald G. Schaefer. And one of the things it talks about was Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was a white county judge who presided over the Mississippi State Convention. And he said bluntly why they were there. Okay, he said, "Let's tell the truth if it burst the bottom of the universe. We have come here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer." All right. And the delegates eventually adopted a literacy test and a poll tax geared to suppress the Black vote in a state with a Black majority. The Mississippi Plan became the model throughout the South, part of a raft of racially oppressive Jim Crow laws that ended Reconstruction. Okay, now, you're going to have some Jim Crow laws prior to Reconstruction ending. Going back to like 1865, 1866, these were Black codes, right? But the Union troops are in these former Confederate states in the South, enforcing to various extents the new rights of African Americans. So these Black codes, these Jim Crow laws, don't take really full effect until after Reconstruction ends with the Compromise of 1877. Okay. And then you're going to have these state constitutions, Mississippi, 1890, South Carolina, 1895, Louisiana, 1898, Alabama, 1901, etc., Oklahoma, Georgia, etc. Okay. All right. So it's important to understand this period of time, you know, talking about Jim Crow, this and then into the early 1990s prior to 1964. It's going to be the Civil Rights Act of 1964, then the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that strike down Jim Crow laws and strike down these laws that put obstacles in the way of the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Mississippi's 1890 convention sought to find a way around the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave African Americans the vote. Okay, it guaranteed the 15th Amendment of 1870 guaranteed the right to vote for African American men. African American women did not get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment of 1920, but the majority of African Americans still lived in the South in 1920, 1930, 1940. So the majority of us could not vote in the Jim Crow South, even though Byron Donalds said the majority of us voted conservatively during Jim Crow. Most of us could not vote during Jim Crow. Just 2 decades earlier, the Mississippi State Legislature had made history by electing Hiram Rhodes Revels to the U.S. Senate. That was in 1870. Okay, he was the first African-American member to serve in either house of Congress, but that moment of racial progress quickly vanished. This is Hiram Rhodes Revels right here. That moment of racial progress quickly vanished after President Rutherford B. Hayes removed all federal troops from southern states in 1877 because he was the Republican candidate for president. Neither Rutherford B. Hayes nor Samuel J. Tilden, the Democratic president in the 1876 presidential election, had enough electoral college votes to become president-elect. There was a backroom deal at the Wormley Hotel in 1877 where Republicans agreed to Rutherford B. Hayes will remove the Union troops out of the South if the Democrats did not contest him becoming president. And this is what happened. And this ends Reconstruction. Now there's racial violence that's take place that contributes to Reconstruction in 1877. There's an economic depression in this country going back to 1873 called the Panic of 1873. Then in 1874, Democrats take back control of the House of Representatives for the first time since prior to the Civil War, which began in 1861. And because of this economic depression that's taking place, 1876, you have 14% unemployment rate in the country. You have hundreds of businesses, actually thousands of businesses that have closed, things of this nature. Then there were allegations of corruption against President Ulysses S. Grant. So these are contributing factors to Republicans losing power, but also as we go further into the mid 1870s and leading up to 1877, there is a decreasing commitment from Republicans to continue to enter into racial conflicts in the South. Okay, so for instance, in 1871, when you have the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, and President Ulysses S. Grant declares martial law in 9 counties in South Carolina, right, to intervene on behalf of African Americans. But then when the Clinton, Mississippi riot of 1875 takes place in Clinton, Mississippi, President Ulysses S. Grant institutes his non-intervention policy because they got tired of intervening into racial conflicts in the South, and there was a declining commitment from Republicans to keep doing this, okay? So this is going to lead up to 1877 and the Compromise of 1877, okay? And I encourage people to, if you read the Smithsonian Mag, read the article when you look at why the Department of Justice was created. It was created in 1870. It was created in 1870 during Reconstruction, largely to enforce the new rights of African Americans. And this was created by Congress. The U.S. Department of Justice that still exists today. Merrick Garland is the Attorney General. We know the office of the Attorney General goes back to 1789, but the actual U.S. Department of Justice was not created until 1870. So if we look at this article here from SmithsonianMag.com, official website of the Smithsonian Institute, official magazine website of the Smithsonian Institute, created 150 years ago, the Justice Department's first mission was to protect Black rights. Created 150 years ago, the Justice Department's first mission was to protect Black rights. In the wake of the Civil War, the government's new force sought to enshrine equality under the law. Now, this is an excellent article by Brian Greene, July 1st, 2020. Okay, this is like 2 months after George Floyd was killed. That was May 25th, 2020. Now, this lithograph right here, this is the Lost Cause, Worse Than Slavery. This is the White League and the Ku Klux Klan, two domestic terrorist organizations. A cartoon by illustrator Thomas Nast shows a member of the White League and a member of the Ku Klux Klan joining hands over a terrorized Black family. Incidentally, Thomas Nast was the cartoonist who really popularized the secular figure of Santa Claus. It's Thomas Nast's drawings of the jolly fat fellow in the red suit with the rosy cheeks that really popularizes Santa Claus. Yes, you have Clement Clark Moore's poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, but the actual image of Santa Claus that we know today goes back to Thomas Nast and his cartoon drawings of Santa Claus. Amos T. Ackerman was an unlikely figure to head the newly formed Department of Justice. In 1870, the United States was still working to bind the nation's wounds, torn open by the Civil War. During this period of Reconstruction, which is 1865 to 1877, the federal government committed itself to guaranteeing full citizenship to all Americans, regardless of race. At the forefront of that effort was Amos T. Ackerman, a former Democrat and enslaver from Georgia, a former slave owner and a former officer in the Confederate Army. Though the United States had an attorney general since the formation of the government in 1789, none had been empowered with the full force of a consolidated legal team quite like Amos T. Ackerman, and none had the monumental task of enforcing the 14th Amendment of 1868 and the 15th Amendments of 1870 and new legislation delivering long overdue rights to 4 million formerly enslaved Black men and women. This department's work on behalf of the emancipated population was so central to its early mission that Amos T. Ackerman established the department's headquarters in the Freedmen's Savings Bank building. The Freedmen's Bank, created in 1865 as an act of Congress. We know the Freedmen's Bank is going to collapse in 1874. There's mismanagement, corruption. African Americans lose $2.9 million in deposits when the Freedmen's Bank collapsed in 1874. Now, in the immediate wake of the Civil War, which ends for all practical purposes April 9th, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, even though the Civil War is still going to go on to a much lesser extent for another 16 months. It ends officially August 1866, when President Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln when Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, President Andrew Johnson announces an official end to the Civil War in August of 1866. Even though General Robert E. Lee, even though his army in Northern Virginia was the largest Confederate army, it was not the only Confederate army. Okay, so there was General Joseph E. Johnston of Tennessee. There was Nathan Bedford Forrest, that traitor, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who goes on to become the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in 1867. And Nathan Bedford Forrest also led the Fort Pillow Massacre in 1864, when you had about 200 African-American Union soldiers who were brutally murdered, brutally executed, many of them shot point blank in the head on General Nathan Bedford Forrest's orders. Okay, so these smaller Confederate armies, terms of surrender had to be negotiated with those generals as well. So the Civil War goes on for a much smaller extent for another 16 months. Officially ends August 1866. History.com has a good article dealing with that. So I teach all this in my the second online class that I teach. And we have a new course starting up on Sunday, June 23rd, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2024. Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, so you can register for that at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we'll get you some more information on that as well. How's everybody doing? How you like this type of information? Tavara said, happy birthday, Brother Michael. Okay, thanks. So hopefully you're learning a lot here, because we're going to get deep into this. Okay, I'm just warming up. All right. I just did a presentation for the Unity group. I just did a webinar for them from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. today. So I did 2 hours with them. So now we're here for the African History Network show today. So I'm just warming up. All right. So in the immediate wake of the Civil War, Amos T. Ackerman, a New Hampshireite who settled in Georgia in the 1840s, looked to the future, leaving the Democrats for the Republicans. He left the Democratic Party for the Republican Party and prosecuting voter intimidation cases as a U.S. district attorney in his adopted state of Georgia. Reflecting on his decision to switch his allegiance to the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, Amos T. Ackerman said, quote, "Some of us who had adhered to the Confederacy felt it to be our duty when we were to participate in the politics of the Union to let the Confederate ideas rule us no longer. Let the Confederate ideas rule us no longer. Regarding the subjugation of one race by the other as an appurtenance of slavery, we were content that it should go to the grave in which slavery had been buried," end quote. So what's going to happen is that martial law is going to be declared in 9 counties in South Carolina, okay, by President Ulysses S. Grant. You're going to have the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1870. Let me go to that here. In reaction to the racial violence, Congress passed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which President Ulysses S. Grant signed into law in April 20 of 1871, providing Amos T. Ackerman unprecedented tools to subdue the Ku Klux Klan, okay? Because you're going to have, Lou Faulkner Williams in her book, The Great South Carolina Ku Klux Klan Trials, 1871 to 1872, wrote that the Klan conducted a year-long reign of terror throughout the region, starting with the November 1870 elections, whipping black and white Republican voters. An army general sent down to quell the riots after local police and state troops failed to do so, estimated the Klan numbered more than 2,000 sworn members in York County alone. Okay, this is this is basically in South Carolina. Quote, "The South Carolina Klan, in its fury," Lou Faulkner Williams wrote, "committed some of the most heinous crimes in the history of the United States," quote unquote. The 1910 novel The Klansman, on which the film The Birth of a Nation is based upon, reportedly draws on these events in York County. So when you see my presentations, see my lectures and in my class that I teach, when we talk about the movie The Birth of a Nation, right? The movie The Birth of a Nation rejuvenates the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had largely died out by 1915. The 1915 is the 50th anniversary of the 13th Amendment of 1865, December 6, 1865, which legally ends slavery. And we know the Ku Klux Klan is founded December 24th, 1865 on Christmas Eve, right? About a week after the 13th Amendment is adopted. 13th Amendment is adopted December 18th, 1865. And incidentally, this is when Kentucky and Delaware are going to end slavery. Kentucky and Delaware, which were two of the four border states, and we know the border states of Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation issued January 1st, 1863, which is why saying Juneteenth was the last day of slavery is a lie, because Kentucky and Delaware didn't abolish slavery until 6 months after Juneteenth, December 18th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was adopted. See, so this is why some of this, even though it's important to celebrate Juneteenth and we have to deal with history, economics, law, and politics in our Juneteenth celebrations. And I'll be speaking at some Juneteenth celebrations here in Detroit on June 14th and the 15th. But we have to correct the history of Juneteenth and protect the history of Juneteenth. So the history of Juneteenth is right in this period of time when we're talking about Jim Crow laws and we're talking about the Reconstruction era. You have to understand the history of that period to actually be able to utilize the Juneteenth federal holiday effectively. This can't be Black folks cookout day. This can't be just a day off from work and you get drunk and eat watermelon and eat ribs and hot dogs and hamburgers. This can't be a Black version of the 4th of July. This has to be much more significant, much more important. All right, so long story short, the Birth of a Nation rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan. All right. And we know that is going to be the second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, which is founded in October 1915 by the Reverend William Joseph Simmons after he sees the movie The Birth of a Nation. Okay. And that second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan is going to have both Democrats and Republicans. Okay, just so people, because a lot of people say, oh, the Democrats created the Ku Klux Klan. You had white supremacists that didn't belong to any party that were members of the Ku Klux Klan, if you want to tell the truth about it. Okay, now, hold on. There was an article I was just about to show you. Where did that go? Right here. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 is still on the books. A lot of people may not know this. It's still on the books. And if we look at this article from August 1st, 2023, see, this is why a lot of Black Republicans don't want you to know this. They get their talking points from white Republicans, and they teach them very well. They teach them very well. Okay. This is why they don't want you to understand this history, because if you start studying this history, then you start studying law. Donald Trump is charged under civil rights law used to prosecute KKK violence. This is from the Washington Post. The provision was originally adopted in 1870 and was intended to protect the newly codified rights of Black citizens and the Civil War, after the Civil War. This is a good article by Isaac Stanley Becker and Spencer S. Sue, August 1st, 2023, from the Washington Post. And it deals with the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871 that we just talked about during the Reconstruction era. And even though there's a third of the Four Enforcement Acts, 1870, Ku Klux Klan Act of 1870. and Ulysses S. Grant declares martial law in 1871. The statute, Section 241 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, was originally adopted as the Enforcement Act of 1870. It was the first in a series of measures known as the Ku Klux Klan Acts, designed to protect rights guaranteed by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, collectively called the Reconstruction Amendments. Section 241 makes it a crime to conspire, to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person, end quote, exercising a right protected by the Constitution or federal law. The 45-page indictment secured by Special Counsel Jack Smith accuses Donald Trump of a conspiracy against the right to vote and to have one's vote counted, end quote, in violation of Section 241. The alleged offense under Section 241 is among 4 counts included in the indictment, which argues that Donald Trump, along with 6 unnamed co-conspirators, eroded trust in the administration of the election and, quote, pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results, end quote. Those means, according to the indictment, included strong-arming state officials to change electoral college votes won by Joe Biden, and recruiting fraudulent electors in swing states prepared to override the will of voters. The alleged conspiracy included using the authority of the Justice Department to create doubt about the election results and encourage the presentation of those illegitimate electors as alternatives to Biden's valid electors. And according to the indictment, it involved pressuring Vice President Mike Pence to delay or thwart the certification of Biden's victory on January 6, 2021, and capitalizing on the violence unleashed that day to, quote, levy false claims of election fraud and convince members of Congress to further delay the certification based on those claims, end quote. Okay. So what Donald Trump is charged with from Special Counsel Jack Smith is directly related to the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1870, which was put in place to protect the rights of African Americans. And this son of a bitch tried to invalidate the vote of 16.9 million African Americans when he tried to overturn election results. He belongs up underneath the prison for the rest of his miserable life. Initially wielded against the Ku Klux Klan for keeping newly emancipated Black people from exercising their right to vote, Section 601 has also been used to prosecute a wider range of election subversion, including threatening or intimidating voters, impersonating voters, destroying ballots, and preventing the official count of ballots. It has also been a linchpin of broader civil rights enforcement used to prosecute hate crimes and law enforcement misconduct. Derek Chauvin, the police officer who pressed his knee into George Floyd's neck in Minneapolis, pleaded guilty in 2021 to violating a related statute, Section 242, which makes it a crime for public officials acting in their official capacity to deny a person's constitutional right. Any Black person who sits up and supports a white supremacist domestic terrorist like Donald Trump is sick, and they either don't understand history and they're lying to you, or they do understand history and they're still lying to you. You can't understand history and support this demon right here, Donald Trump. Go read this article here. What Donald Trump is being charged with, the law that he's being charged with, that's from the Ku Klux Klan Act. Isn't it poetic justice that this traitor is being charged with the same thing that they were charging these domestic terrorist Klansmen in 1871 of prosecuting them and putting them in jail? Now, let me ask you a question. Who's explaining this to you? Who have you heard explain this to you? Has the Breakfast Club explained this to you? Charlemagne the God, all these black social media disinformation agents out here? Who's explaining this to you? This article didn't come out yesterday. This article, we talked about this here on the African History Network show before. This is the type of research I do. Okay. This article is from 2023. All right, let's continue. But read this article. Trump is charged under civil rights law used to prosecute KKK violence. No wonder MAGA is attacking the way history is taught in schools, and they're attacking affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anything that would teach us to understand the law. Because when I teach about political self-defense, it deals with understanding laws and policies, how they affect African Americans, and how to disarm these people of these laws and policies that they're using to attack us, and how to reverse that and use these laws and policies against them. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is law still on the books right now that goes back to the Reconstruction era. The U.S. Department of Justice was created largely to protect the new rights of African Americans. And if Donald Trump wins the presidency again, he's going to gut and neuter the Department of Justice. They're not going to prosecute police officers. They're not going to enforce a lot of these rights. They're going to weaken the civil rights department of the Department of Justice. And he's going to use the Department of Justice against his quote unquote enemies, who are really people just following the law, holding his crooked ass accountable. Okay, now we got this person. I don't know how often Velma watches the African History Network show. Probably not too often. She said, my question to you is, do you understand that there is no one running for president that deserves the black vote in America? That's false. Have you read this document right here, Velma? Fact sheet: the Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunity for black Americans and communities across the country. This is a 36-page document that takes you through policy by policy. Now, this one was last updated February 27, 2023. I've read the new one that was updated February of 2024. And it's good. See, I don't get into arguments with people that don't understand politics and law. This takes you through, this is at whitehouse.gov, where all this information is. I've gone through and read numerous fact sheets there that break down these policies and show you directly how these policies from the Biden-Harris administration are helping the African-American community. They talk about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Yeah, but out of 260 Republicans, only 34 voted for it. Only 19 in the Senate and 14 in the House voted for it. Overwhelmingly, all the Democrats in both the House and the Senate voted for it. Yeah, it was bipartisan, but only 34 out of 260 Republicans voted for the bill, the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that lifted 1 million African-American children out of poverty, okay, that saved the U.S. economy. No Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for the bill. Implementing robust regulatory reform to reverse because Donald Trump either got rid of or greatly weakened 100 environmental policies that were held over from the Obama administration and previous administrations, and environmental racism, climate change, and environmental issues disproportionately negatively hurt African Americans. Black-owned businesses, you see the fastest rate of African American-owned businesses being created in 30 years. The lowest unemployment rate in history of African Americans in April 2023, when it dropped down to 4.7%. I was looking at that earlier today. 15 million jobs created, 2.6 million jobs for African Americans. The president's economic agenda has led to historically low unemployment, including among Black Americans. That's true. Lowering energy cost, the Inflation Reduction Act, because African Americans are disproportionately harmed by the temperatures in our communities being higher temperatures because of climate change. So the Inflation Reduction Act it reduces energy costs. And this is the first really large bill to fight against climate change. Making home efficiency upgrades more affordable, creating economic opportunities and good paying jobs, supporting unions. One of the things Biden did was he signed an executive order that required at least $15 an hour to be paid for all federal employees and contractors. African Americans are 18.4% of the federal workforce. That gave a lot of them raises. Provide relief to farmers. The Inflation Reduction Act includes $5.3 billion that will provide relief to tens of thousands of farmers. Of that money, $3.1 billion will help distressed borrowers pay off their farm debts without ultimately taking the land or making the farmer ineligible for future assistance. An additional $2.2 billion will go to farmers who have suffered discrimination by the USDA farm programs, making critical investments in Black families and communities in the American Rescue Plan that no Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for. Historic expansion of the child tax credit, cutting child poverty to record lows for Black children. Then you look at the investment that was made for childcare, supporting childcare providers and reducing childcare costs for Black families. Black families are nearly 2 times more likely than white parents to have to quit, turn down, or make a major change in their job due to childcare disruptions. The American Rescue Plan that no Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for, that Byron Donalds voted against, that Wesley Hunt voted against, that every Black Republican in the House of Representatives voted against, and punk-ass Senator Tim Scott voted against this as well. The American Rescue Plan provided a $39 billion lifeline to help child care providers stay open and compensate early child educators as they provide safe and healthy environments for children and help parents work. States have already delivered American Rescue Plan stabilization grants to more than 200,000 child care providers, 1 in 5 of whom are Black. That's 20%, with 13.5% of the population. That's 20% for those who are mathematically challenged. Let me repeat this. Who is explaining this to you? Who is explaining this to you? American Rescue Plan stabilization grants were delivered to more than 200,000 child care providers. 1 in 5 of these child care providers are African Americans, serving as many as 9.5 million children and their families. In most states, providers in 98% of persistent poverty counties receive aid, and more than half of the providers receiving funds were operating in the most racially diverse counties in the country. Okay, read the rest of that. Then you go, the American Rescue Plan also helped lower child care costs for all families, including Black families, including by expanding the child and dependent care tax credit. The American Rescue Plan tripled the earned income tax credit for 17 million workers without dependent children. Then they talk about the $46.5 billion that was in the American Rescue Plan for renter assistance for renters as well as landlords, and how some African Americans were able to take advantage of that and stay in their homes. Extending a lifeline to struggling small businesses and expanding access to capital. All right, so read the rest of this. This is a 36-page document here. It goes through category by category, policy by policy, and shows you how these policies are helping the African American community. Now, go look at what Republicans are talking about. Most of them are against these policies. Most of them voted against this stuff, trying to undermine it. Student loan debt forgiveness. You have like over 5 million people that receive student loan forgiveness, about $163 billion now. Okay. It would have been more But Donald Trump's 6-3 conservative Supreme Court struck down Biden's executive order on student loan forgiveness that would have moved 500,000 African-American families from a negative net worth to a positive net worth, because Republicans don't support student loan forgiveness. Now, they supported forgiving the personal protection loans for COVID, because some of them got those loans. Some of them got loans forgiven for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. Some Republicans in Congress. Advancing equitable employment outcomes and boosting wages for Black federal workers. On June 25th, 2021, President Joe Biden signed an executive order on advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, in the federal workforce. This executive order launched a whole of government initiative to cultivate a federal workforce that draws from the full diversity of the nation and that advances equitable employment opportunities for workers from underserved communities. Okay, right here. This is what I was talking about. Further, the president has taken a series of executive actions leading to a $15 minimum wage for employees of federal contractors and federal employees. These actions impacted more than 370,000 workers in 2022 alone, including Black workers who disproportionately make up this population, because African-American workers are 18.4% of the 370,000 workers, helping to address long-standing wage disparities, reversing decades of disinvestment through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, because there's money in the infrastructure bill that most Republicans didn't vote for that would not only replace lead pipes like in Flint, Michigan, that desperately needs it, but also 3,000 communities across the country that had higher lead levels than Flint, Michigan did. But one of the things it's also going to do is it's going to repair the damage that the expressways did that separated African-American communities. When the U.S. Interstate Highway Acts of 1952 and 1956 drove 41,000 miles of interstate highways all across the country, okay, and it ran through 1,600 African-American communities, disrupting African-American communities. One of them was the Black community where the top supermarket was and is, that was shot up by the shooter in Buffalo, New York. That was an area, that was an African-American community that was bisected by the highways. One of the things that this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is doing, because 56,000 is over $400 billion so far that has funded 56,000 construction projects across the country. They have information about that at whitehouse.gov. One of the things that this infrastructure bill is going to do is reconnect Black neighborhoods divided by legacy highway infrastructure. Now, you got a lot of Republicans that don't want to even acknowledge the damage the expressways did. And most Republicans did not vote for the infrastructure bill. Now, they're there at the groundbreaking in their district and in their state, and at the ribbon cutting, the groundbreaking, all that, smiling and grinning. But most of them voted against this bill that provided the funds for the infrastructure project that's in their district. And provide other resources to finally give Black communities a fair shot at the American dream. So we need this and more, yes, but most Republicans voted against what you got and will nullify it and take it away if they take back full control of the Senate, expand their margins in the House, and take back the White House. During the 20th century, federally funded infrastructure projects too often segregated and harmed low-income communities, especially predominantly Black neighborhoods. Construction of the federal highway system, in particular, cut off once thriving Black communities from resources and opportunity. The bipartisan infrastructure law that only 34 Republicans out of 260 voted for launched a new Reconnecting Communities program, which will invest $1 billion to help reconnect communities that were previously cut off from economic opportunities by transportation infrastructure. In addition, the Inflation Reduction Act includes $3 billion for the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program to help advance transportation projects in disadvantaged or underserved communities. Over the past year, Department of Transportation has awarded grants to multiple projects to reconnect communities, including an interstate capping project in Atlanta, a Greenway project in St. Louis, and the I-375 Detroit Community Reconnection Project right here in Detroit, right near where I live. Read the rest of this. Assisting black landowners in resolving title issues. An estimated 60% of black-owned land in the South is heirs' property that passes through inheritance without a will, and that, as a result, has historically rendered owners ineligible for U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA programs, including lending. I've done entire shows dealing with heirs' property because the loopholes in heirs' property laws is one of the ways historically our land has been taken away from us. That and overtaxation, because about a month ago, we did the show when we talked about Andrew Carl's new book that deals with how African Americans, since like the Reconstruction era, have been overtaxed by $600 billion. In July 2021, the USDA rolled out the heirs property relending program, which primarily aids underserved communities, including Black Americans. The new program provides funds to assist heirs in resolving ownership and succession issues on farmland with multiple owners. Launched an initiative to cut junk fees. Who's tired of junk fees? Lowering healthcare costs and improving health outcomes for Black communities. President Biden is committed to keeping healthcare costs down for individuals and families and improving access to healthcare to address disparities in Black communities. These policies and programs include lowering healthcare costs and expanding coverage. There's a record number of people who signed up for the Affordable Healthcare Act now, 41 million. Many of them are African Americans. Millions of lower and middle income Black families enrolled in health insurance marketplaces saw their premiums lowered or eliminated as a result of the American Rescue Plan and will continue to benefit from provisions included in the Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, by the way, did I tell you no Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for the Inflation Reduction Act? I forgot to tell you that. No Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're saying if they take back control of the keep control of the House, take back control of the Senate and the White House, they're going to reverse some of the policies that are in the Inflation Reduction Act that are beneficial to us. Almost 3.9 million Black people were uninsured in 2019 before President Biden took office, and over 570,000 Black people fell into the Medicaid coverage gap and were locked out of coverage because their state refused to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. Like a lot of Republican-controlled states, a lot of them refused to expand Medicaid. Then the administration's efforts to expand access to coverage has driven the uninsured rate to historic lows, with more than 3.6 million people gaining coverage during last year's record-breaking 16.3 million American Care Act enrollment period. I haven't even talked about the $16 billion that HBCUs got from 2021 to 2024, which is a record amount of funding from any administration. I haven't even talked about that. Protecting Black maternal health. The administration is also committed to protecting Black moms and improving maternal health outcomes, including addressing unacceptably high rates of maternal mortality and morbidity that disproportionately impact Black mothers and families. They go through and deal with that as well. So read this, because I don't have time to get through all this. This is at whitehouse.gov. Now, this version was last updated February 27, 2023. The new one, they've consolidated this and streamlined it so it's like 9 pages. That was updated February 2024. The Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. So when people say nobody has earned our vote, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I really don't. You obviously have not read this. I can take you through these policies and break this stuff down. I don't know what you're talking about. But I can tell you what Republicans would do if they take back control of all this. They're going to reverse this stuff. And all you got to do, if you haven't read Project 20, if you don't know about Project 2025, I don't know what rock you're living up under. But that's like game over right there. Do you realize if Donald Trump becomes president again, he can get 2 more Supreme Court justices confirmed, which would be 5 out of 9. And these are lifetime appointments, because if he gets reelected, Justice Roberts and Clarence Thomas are going to resign because they're going to step down because they're old. And Trump will appoint some young ultra conservatives in their 30s that could be there for the next 50 years ruling on cases. So play around if you want to. This is straight up war. Play around if you want to. This is why this chicanery and skullduggery of a Byron Donalds and Candace Owens is so pernicious, because I know they're lying. And I can prove it. And they're working on behalf of these crazy MAGA people like Trump and his cronies. Okay, let's continue here. All right, now what I want to do, I want to go to, we're talking about man in the house rule, all that, right? Let's go back to this article here from theroot.com, because we started talking about Jim Crow history in the Jim Crow era. You got to understand, all this deals with history. Your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. I can listen to what people say and tell what they haven't read. And I can tell when they don't understand history. Okay? So let's go back to this article from theroot.com, which breaks this down, called Welfare Fathers and Those Persistent Myths. Welfare Fathers and Those Persistent Myths, by Cynthia Gordy. Okay, we're going to go to the section that deals with clearing up misconceptions. A particular fact that those giving the side eye to the American welfare system often trot out is that in 1890, the same year as the Mississippi state constitution was voted on and written at the Mississippi State Convention. That's how we got on that whole topic. 1890, married couples headed 80% of Black households. 1890, married couples headed 80% of Black households. The figure held constant over the next 7 decades through 1960. However, by 1970, after President Lyndon Baines Johnson established social reforms like WIC, the special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, food stamps, Medicaid, and public housing projects, Black families with mothers and fathers at home have fallen to 64%. Black 2-parent homes continue to plummet over the next 20 years, hitting 38% in 1990, where it has since remained. Okay, now it's gone up since then. This article is from 2011. I got some other evidence from the U.S. Census Bureau. It's gone up since, it's basically gone up since 1990. Okay, Black 2-parent homes continue to plummet over the next 20 years, hitting 38% in 1990. But Andrew Billingsley, a sociologist, acclaimed for his pioneering work tracing the African-American family, attributes the abrupt change in family structure not to welfare policies, but to rising unemployment. Not to welfare policies, but rising unemployment. He's absolutely correct on this. I talked about this when I went through and deconstructed and destroyed Candace Owens' Breakfast Club argument. Quote, what happened in the mid-1950s were technological changes that abolished unskilled jobs that most black men could do and created high-tech jobs that they couldn't do. Okay, he's absolutely correct on this. Okay, and I've talked about this before. What happened in the mid-1950s were technological changes that abolished unskilled jobs that most black men could do and created high-tech jobs that they couldn't. Andrew Billingsley, sociologist, told TheRoot.com, explaining that the advent of efficient goods-producing machines drove millions of black men out of the stable blue-collar workforce. Quote, that's what kept black families from getting and staying married, not the welfare system. To say otherwise is a misunderstanding of the data, and it's a misreading of history, end quote. He's absolutely correct. I'm going to show you some more evidence on this. On the subject of common misconceptions about public assistance, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, would like to clarify that there is no public housing eligibility requirement that excludes couples. There is no public housing eligibility requirement that excludes couples. Some states used to apply such regulations, but the U.S. Supreme Court struck down those regulations in 1968. Uh-oh. Whitney Houston, we have a problem. So now, why didn't Candace Owens tell you this on the Breakfast Club interview? Why didn't Byron Donalds tell you this when he was sitting there in Philadelphia smoking a cigar with Wesley Hunt, talking about Jim Crow? And our families were together in Jim Crow. Why didn't Byron Donalds tell you about this? Why didn't Larry Elder and all these other black conservatives out here? Why don't they tell you? And Senator Tim Scott? Because they all read from the same playbook. Quote, the notion that we have rules prohibiting fathers from living in the home is simply not true, said Sims, who added that the agency does take income levels into consideration. Quote, but if two parents are working and don't qualify, we have a significant supply of other affordable housing programs around the country for them, end quote. Another idea swirling around is that people convicted of crimes are not eligible for public housing. Quote, under the national policy, there are only 2 crimes for which we prohibit anyone from coming in, and that's if you sold methamphetamine. Now, this is as of 2011 when this article came out. I'm not sure if this has been updated. The policy: if you sold methamphetamine, or if you are a lifetime registered sex offender. Okay, if you sold methamphetamine, or if you are a lifetime registered sex offender, Sims explained. Yet local authorities can set other standards, and some do bar applicants with records. Quote, our goal is family reunification. We've let local housing authorities know that we want that changed, end quote, said Sims. Okay, now, so read the rest of this article here. Welfare fathers and those persistent myths. Welfare fathers and those persistent myths. And I want to look quickly here at the man in the house rule, because this is some nonsense that Byron Donalds, when he was there in Philadelphia smoking a cigar, but in other since that took place in other media appearances where he tried to defend what he said, he talks about the policies from Lyndon Baines Johnson and Great Society programs and how it broke up black families, things like this. Okay, so let's look at this piece here from encyclopedia.com, which deals with the man in the house rule. Let me grab this right here. Just a second. Okay. Because I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. Man in the house rule, a regulation that was formally applied in certain jurisdictions that denied poor families welfare payments in the event that a man resided under the same roof. Now, keep in mind, like I just said, this was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, 1968. Nobody talks about this. I don't understand why. Before we go to that, I want to remind you, if you like this type of information, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like. You can register for my online history courses, and you're going to learn so much. If you learn a lot from this broadcast here, you're going to learn so much from my online history classes. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I'm speaking at the Juneteenth celebration taking place at the Motown Museum, Jubilee Detroit weekend. Visit JuneteenthJubileeDET.com. Friday, June 14th, event is 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. So I'll be speaking for a little bit there, giving a brief history of Juneteenth. Dancing in the Street, Motown Museum, 2648 West Grand Boulevard, Detroit, Michigan. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Then Saturday, I'm on a panel discussion at 3 p.m. The event is 12 noon to 6 p.m. Saturday, June 15, 2024. Liberation for Life at the Joseph Walker Williams Community Center, 8431 Rosa Parks Boulevard, Detroit, Michigan. A family fun day to promote health, wealth, and education. And then Sunday, June 16th, 12 noon to 6 p.m. Freedom Festival, Eastern Market District. I'll be there as well. I probably won't be speaking there. I'm speaking Friday and Saturday, but we'll see what happens Sunday. Okay, so we have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Visit Juneteenth Jubilee DET.com for more information. My Saturday class is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history, what leads up to transatlantic slave trade taking place. You can register right now for it and watch the previous class sessions. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Even after the course is over with, you still have full access. Our next class is Saturday, June 22nd, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here. We have the class lesson plan here that you can download, and it goes through and gives an overview of the topics for each class. We look at 200 slides that I put together, 82 100 articles. There are 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of the books to follow along in class. Then the second class that I teach that's starting up Sunday, June 23rd, 2024, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Black Resistance Movements from the Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Okay, we go through and look at this history chronologically, year by year, and look at what leads to the Civil War taking place. We studied the Reconstruction era, Jim Crow era, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968, to look at what happened to us after slavery ended, what were the laws and policies put in place to bring us to where we are today, to understand where we need to go from here. So you can register for this class is on sale, $80. Then we have the course bundle. Click right here, register for the course bundle. You get both classes. Also, the course bundle that is $120, okay, for both classes. All right, click right here for the course bundle. Okay, so let's look at this here. Man in the house rule. Also, if you want to support the African History Network, you can do that through Cash App and PayPal. We definitely need your support. This helps us to keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, pay for these services that I use. It's not free to do what I do. It's not free to do the research that I do. $, the AHN Show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Click right here, Cash App, and this has our QR code. These other ones here are fake African History Network Cash App accounts that I'm trying to shut down There's about 5 fake ones out there. This is ours. When you go to it, say Michael, it'll probably show my picture there. But we have the link right here on our website. So, you know, you're dealing with me. Okay. So let's look at this here. Man in the house rule. And this is from encyclopedia.com. A regulation that was formally applied in certain jurisdictions that denied poor families welfare payments in the event that a man resided under the same roof with them. In the event that a man resided under the same roof with them. Under the man in the house rule, a child otherwise qualified for welfare benefits was denied those benefits if the child's mother was living with or having relations with any single or married able-bodied male. Okay, if the mother was living or having relations with any single or married able-bodied male. The man was considered a substitute father even if the man was not supporting the children. Before 1968, administrative agencies in many states created and enforced the man in the house rule. Now, this was enforced at the state level. See, Candace Owens and Byron Donalds, they blame President Lyndon Baines Johnson. They didn't say it was enforced at the state level, not coming from the federal government. Before 1968, administrative agencies in many states created and enforced the man in the house rule. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the regulation as being contrary to the legislative goals of the Aid to Families of Dependent Children, known as AFDC. But wait a second. The Black conservatives say this was the whole purpose of these diabolical programs to break up the Black family. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1968 struck down the regulation as being contrary to the legislative goals of Aid to Families of Dependent Children program, AFDC. The AFDC program was established by the Social Security Act of 1935. We're coming to that in just a minute because we're coming to look at the Great Society programs that these Black conservatives keep lying about that helped a whole lot of poor-ass white people. The AFDC program, established by the Social Security Act of 1935 under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that was to help white people. This provides benefits to keep the children of impoverished parents. In the U.S. Supreme Court case of King versus Smith of 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court entertained a challenge to the man in the house rule brought by the 4 children of Miss Sylvester Smith, a widow. These children were denied benefits by Dallas County, Alabama. Alabama is one of the poorest states in the country. Red state, former Confederate state, Alabama. The red states, these are the poorest states in the country. Okay? Alabama, Mississippi, all these former slaveholding states. These children were denied benefits by Dallas County, Alabama welfare authorities based on their knowledge that a man named Williams was visiting Smith, Miss Sylvester Smith, on weekends and had sexual relations with her. The children of Miss Smith filed a class action lawsuit in federal court on behalf of other children in the state of Alabama who were denied benefits under Alabama's substitute father regulation. This regulation considered a man a substitute father if he lived in the home with the mother. He visited the home frequently for the purpose of living with the mother, or he cohabitated with the mother elsewhere. King, citing Alabama Manual for Administration of Public Assistance, testimony in the case revealed that there was some confusion among the authorities on how to interpret the regulation. One official testified that the regulation applied only if the parties had sex at least once a week. Another official testified that sex every 3 months was sufficient. And still another official placed the frequency at once every 6 months. So there's confusion among the officials of how frequent the sex had to be. According to the High Court, U.S. Supreme Court, Congress did not intend that the AFDC program required children to, quote, look for their food to a man who is not in the least obliged to support them, end quote. The court maintained that when Congress used the term parent in the Social Security Act of 1935, which was for white people, it was referring to, quote, an individual who owed to the child a state-imposed legal duty of support, end quote. Ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, in 1968 struck down the man in the house rule by holding that under the AFDC provision in the Social Security Act, quote, the destitute children who are legally fatherless cannot be flatly denied federally funded assistance on the transparent fiction that they have a substitute father. So what this means is Byron Donalds and Candace Owens and these other black conservatives out here lying and buck dancing, they're lying. And they're never going to tell you that the law that they're citing was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1968. I think they're going to get kicked out of the Black Conservative Club if they tell the truth. I think all their privileges are going to be taken away from them. They're going to lose their shows and their little privileges. Their white wives may divorce them. They're never going to tell you this. Go read that article that gets deep into this case. Okay, so you had that struck down, 1968, right? Then they talk about the Great Society programs, welfare, okay? All these black people are lazy. They don't want to work. Welfare system, like I said before, that was created for white people. The welfare system was not created by Lyndon Baines Johnson. That goes back to 1935 during the Great Depression. Let's look at this from archives.gov. What's archives.gov? That's the U.S. National Archives. You know, the same U.S. National Archives that wanted the classified documents back from Donald Trump. And he said because of the Presidential Records Act of 1978, he can keep the documents. But that's not what the Presidential Records Act of 1978 says. You can go read it at archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, because I read it. That's how I know he's lying. This says all those documents that presidents have are supposed to go to the U.S. National Archives because they belong to the people. If there's some documents that he has to keep or something, or what have you, or if he needs documents for, like, to write a book, there's a process to go through to keep documents temporarily or something like that. You can't just say the Presidential Records Act says I can keep these documents, therefore you keep it, and then you ignore subpoenas from the National Archives. You just ignore that stuff. No. That's not how the real world works. Okay, Social Security Act 1935. Read this at archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, because I go to archives.gov to do research. Social Security Act 1935. On August 14, 1935, the Social Security Act established a system of old age benefits for workers, benefits for victims of industrial accidents, unemployment insurance, and aid for dependent mothers and children, persons who are blind, and persons with disabilities. That was created in 1935, and that was created largely for white people and white women. That was not created for African Americans. Before the 1930s, the support for the elderly was a matter of local, state, and family concern. On January 17, 1935, President Franklin Delano, not Delano, 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 Roosevelt sent a message to Congress asking for Social Security legislation. The same day, Senator Robert Wagner of New York and Representative David Lewis of Maryland introduced bills reflecting the administration's views. Okay, so read the rest of this here. This deals with the welfare system that the Black conservatives say was created by President Johnson. That was created during the Great Depression, and that was part of the Social Security Act of 1935. And that was for white people. If we look here at, there was a really good article by the Grio.com, Michael Harriot at the Grio. And I'm not a big fan of Michael Harriot at the Grio. He does write some good articles every now and then. There was this one right here. They did a fact check on these lies Byron Donalds was telling. And they did a pretty good job with the fact check. This article right here. Byron Donalds implied Black people were better off under Jim Crow, so we checked. Byron Donalds implied Black people were better off under Jim Crow, so we checked. Okay, this is from the Grio.com, picked up by Yahoo News, written Friday, June 7th, 2024, by Michael Harriot. This is Byron Donalds right here. This straight up idiot. Let's see. Byron Donalds voted to overturn election results in 2020. So it wasn't unusual when people accused the two-term congressman of valorizing the era of government-approved racism known as Jim Crow. Okay, so they go through and break down, do some fact checking here. What was Jim Crow? After the 1876 presidential election, 15 white men gathered in a room to figure out a solution to the first Stop the Steal movement, known as the Wormley Agreement or the Compromise of 1877. 5 Supreme Court justices, 5 senators, and 5 representatives awarded the presidency to the Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes in exchange for ending the Reconstruction era. The concessions included a specific accommodation that the federal government would stop forcing former Confederate states to recognize the constitutional rights of Black citizens. Now, notice how none of these Black conservatives want to tell you that the Republican Party turned their backs on African Americans. And this is one of the reasons why Reconstruction ended. Because the Republicans sided with the Democrats and said, if you let Rutherford B. Hayes become president, He removed the Union troops out of the South. Therefore, you can take back control of the governments and you can do whatever you want to do. None of these black MAGA conservatives / Republicans, notice how none of them tell you this. This is documented history. Legislatures in northern and southern states immediately created a series of racially discriminatory policies that became known as Jim Crow laws. For 100 years, from the end of race-based slavery until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, every black person in America lived under this constitutionally enforced government-approved system of white supremacy. Because of Jim Crow, the black codes created after emancipation were now the law of the land. Segregated schools were mandatory under Jim Crow. Under Jim Crow, it was perfectly fine to disenfranchise black voters and ban non-white people from living where they wanted. Jim Crow excluded black taxpayers from using facilities built and maintained with their tax dollars. Like, for instance, you couldn't use, generally speaking, you couldn't use the public library. Public library was for white people, but your taxpayer dollars are funding the public library. You may not have been able to be a police officer or work in city government, but your taxpayer dollars are funding city government and paying for the police officers. Or you can serve as a fireman. Couldn't work for the fire department, but your taxpayer dollars are funding the fire department. Were black voters more conservative? See, this is one of the things that Byron Donalds said. He said they were voting conservatively during Jim Crow. Most people could not vote under Jim Crow. According to the U.S. Census data between 1880 and 1960, the majority of black Americans lived in the South. Specifically, they lived in states that disenfranchised African-American voters, which is why the Civil Rights Act of 1964 pre-clearance requirement banned these states from changing their voting laws without permission from the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice was created in 1870 to enforce the new rights of African Americans. It is literally impossible to know what the majority of black Americans wanted under Jim Crow if they could not vote. Even if one counted the votes of the black people who did vote, there was never a moment in the history of this country when the majority of black voters supported conservative politics. Not as a whole. Not as a whole. What are you calling conservative? Because, see, if what's interesting, Donalds really doesn't understand history. Okay. The Democratic Party was taking back control of the state legislatures during Jim Crow. They're rewriting state constitutions, imposing segregation laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, things like this. So what are you calling conservative? The Republicans were the ones who were the radicals fighting against that. So when you say African Americans were voting conservatively, what the hell were they voting for? And how were they voting conservatively? Were you saying they're voting for laws to oppress them and suppress their vote? The name of that event that Byron Donalds was speaking at, if I remember correctly, I think it was called Cognac and Cigars. I think that's the name of the event, Cognac and Cigars. I think Byron Donalds had too much of that cognac. And now he stuck his foot in it And now he has to go with the bit. Because he can't admit he made a mistake, was wrong, didn't know what he was talking about, anything like that. Now he has to go with the bit. Yeah, New York Times. Yeah. It was called, yeah, right here. Byron Donalds, Trump VP contender, suggests Jim Crow era had an upside. The New York Times. Right here. Okay, the Republican congressman from Florida was visiting Philadelphia to persuade black voters to support former President Donald Trump. How sick can you be? Al Sharpton, I have my disagreements with Al Sharpton on certain things. Al Sharpton, Reverend Al Sharpton, asked him the correct question. What the hell happened to you to make you think that the Jim Crow era was somehow positive? Now, I just showed you the article from the Washington Post where Donald Trump is being prosecuted by Special Counsel Jack Smith under Section 241 of federal code, federal statute, which is the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. And you're going to take your black ass to Philadelphia to try to convince black people to vote for Donald Trump, who tried to invalidate their votes in 2020 and overthrow the government. You are a special type of stupid to do something like that. That's a special type of stupid. Yeah, Congress, Cognac, and Cigars. That's the name of the event. I think he had too much cognac. That's what I think happened to him. He got carried away. He had too much cognac. Made a damn fool out of himself. I mean, it's not the first time he made a fool out of himself, but he really put his foot in it this time. Okay, let's continue. So I'm gonna wrap this up here in a minute. Let's go back to this piece here from the Grio. Okay. Now, shortly after the Civil War ends 1865, Southern Republicans started the anti-black Lily White movement to prevent black voters from gaining control of the party. Okay. This is some Southern Republicans. Now, in my research on the Lily White movement, so there's like, we can say there are two periods of time in the Lily White movement, just like there's two, really three incarnations of the Ku Klux Klan, right? The big incarnation of the Lily White movement is in 1928, when Republicans nominate Herbert Hoover to be president, and they appeal to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover as president. And they are pushing African Americans out of the Republican Party, ignoring our needs, ignoring our concerns, ignoring the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, this is the Lily White movement that really is looked at. That's really looked at the beginning of what is called the party realignment. The party realignment, and the party realignment is the shifting between the ideologies of the Democratic Party and Republican Party. And you have a lot of Southern segregationist Democrats that leave the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party. Okay, that's the party realignment. Read this article here from ChicagoMag.com. How the party of Lincoln lost virtually the entire black vote in 88 years. ChicagoMag.com. how the party of Lincoln lost virtually the entire black vote in 88 years. In 1928, the Chicago Defender, black newspaper, warned the GOP that it was in danger of alienating African Americans. They did not listen, and the fall came fast. This is by Wet Moser, July 29th, 2016. July 29th, 2016. This is a few months before the 2016 presidential election. In this article, they talk about the Lily White movement. Now, here's Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover at Howard University, 1932. President Herbert Hoover. This is during the Great Depression. His policies and rhetoric were the beginning of the end for the black Republican vote. Okay, and I want to fast forward here. 1928. Robert Abbott, the founder of the Chicago Defender, is calling out the Republican Party in this article. Okay. Let me see. And it talks about here, let's see here. In party ideologies in America, 1828 to 1996, political scientist John Gehring marks the beginning of the modern Republican Party as President Herbert Hoover's shifting campaign rhetoric. Well, he wins the 1928 presidential election. Herbert Hoover's shifting campaign rhetoric in 1928 and 1932. He's going to lose in 1932 to Franklin Roosevelt. When he talked more about the virtues of the American home and family than hardtack economics, because you're during the Great Depression. He mishandled the Great Depression and he loses the election. He only serves one term. Hoover's oratory about the progress of the individual being threatened by an overzealous government, bureaucracy stuck around for the next 8 decades, and the wisdom of generations has helped us discern that this was indeed the start of a new Republican era. In the final weeks of the 1928 election, the Chicago Defender printed a series of articles and editorials that listed post-war grievances with the Republican Party. So they're talking about after World War I, which ends in 1918, post-war. In Washington, D.C., where the federal government was in direct authority, Republican presidents Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, as well as Republican majorities in the U.S. Congress, had not only acquiesced or given into or surrendered to the segregation of public transit, but failed to stop or even criticize parades of thousands of Ku Klux Klansmen before the White House, because the Klan was rejuvenated by the movie The Birth of a Nation that debuted February 8th, 1915, and then the Klan becomes very powerful in the 1920s. So the Republican Party is ignoring the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. They're ignoring the needs of African Americans, and they're starting to push us out of the Republican Party. This is known as the Lily White movement of 1928. The newspaper was particularly dissatisfied. Chicago Defender was particularly dissatisfied with the current Republican nominee for president, Herbert Hoover, who has spoken favorably of making the party lily white. Republican Herbert Hoover spoke favorably of making the Republican Party lily white and excluded African Americans from their traditional role in that year's Republican National Convention. This was an effort to push African Americans out of the Republican Party, starting with Herbert Hoover in 1928 and the initiation of what's known as the Lily White movement of 1928. Most troubling of all was the candidate's covert backing from the Ku Klux Klan, whose members despised the Democratic nominee, New York Governor Al Smith, because he was Catholic, and Al Smith was a moderate from New York. So the Ku Klux Klan is back in the Republican Party. Now, why aren't these black conservatives talking about that? See, I've got receipts for them longer than CVS receipts. Read the rest of this article. How the party of Lincoln lost virtually the entire black vote in 88 years. This is from ChicagoMag.com. Okay, now I'm going to wrap this up here in a few minutes because this is my second 2-hour presentation that I did today. Okay. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. How you all like this type of information? You can support the African History Network. We definitely need your support. $, the AHN Show through Cash App. $, the AHN Show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. We're going to post the information here. Register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays and Sundays. Our new class starts up Sunday, June 23rd. As soon as you register, there's bonus content that you can start watching. Okay. And you can join us and watch. There's bonus content, and you can register for the bundle pack also for my 2 classes. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, now let's go back to this piece here from theroot.com because they dealt with some good history here. Some of the dates that I have may be slightly different than some of theirs, but overall, you know, they did their thing. I'll give it to them. They did some good research. Southern Republicans started the anti-black Lily White movement to prevent black voters from gaining control of the Republican Party. Meanwhile, conservative Democrats did not even allow black people to attend the party's convention in an official capacity until 1924. Although majority of black voters supported Franklin Roosevelt's presidential campaign, it was not until 1948 that most black voters considered themselves Democrats. It was not until 1948 that most black voters considered themselves Democrats. By then, white voters had fled the Democratic Party precisely because the party was no longer conservative. Now, research I've done, you'll see some of them leaving in 1948, but some of those conservative Democrats are going to stay, but they do eventually leave, the majority of them, and go to the Republican Party. What happened was you had the Strom Thurmond ran for president in 1948. Okay. There's a good article from history.com, official website of the History Channel. And I use I use this article in my classes. How the party of Lincoln won over the once Democratic South. How the party of Lincoln won over the once Democratic South. And now this article doesn't talk about the Lily White movement in 1928. I deal with that, but they hone in on 1948, presidential election 1948, and Harry S. Truman, and how the Democratic Party had a more pro-civil rights platform in 1948. Okay, read this article, how the party of Lincoln won over the once Democratic South. Democratic defectors known as the Dixiecrats, started a switch to the Republican Party in a movement that was later fueled by a so-called Southern strategy. So when Candace Owens said the Southern strategy doesn't exist, blah, 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 she's lying. They used a Southern strategy in 1928, Republicans, to appeal the Southern segregationist Democrats and 5 former Confederate states. They used, Richard Nixon used a Southern strategy in 1968. She's lying. And she has to be getting paid to lie like that because you can't be that stupid for free. She has to be getting paid. If we go here to page 2 of this article, let's see. After the Civil War, the Democratic Party's opposition to Republican Reconstruction legislation solidified its hold on the South. The Democratic Party, quote, the Democratic Party came to be more than a political party in the South. It came to be a defender of a way of life, Goldfield says. And they're citing David Goldfield, author of the book on American politics called The Gifted Generation When Government Was Good. It came out in November 2019. He said, and that way of life was the restoration of much as possible of white supremacy. That way of life was the restoration as much as possible of white supremacy. The Confederate statues you see all around were primarily erected by Democrats. Okay. Now, this is before the party realignment is completed and the Southern segregationist Democrats leave to join the Republican Party. Up until the post-World War II period, World War II ends in 1945, the party's hold on the region was so entrenched that Southern politicians usually could not get elected unless they were Democrats. But when President Harry S. Truman, a Democratic Southerner, introduced a pro-civil rights platform at the Democratic Party's 1948 convention, a faction of the Democratic Party walked out because African Americans going back to 1928 and going back to 1932, when Franklin Roosevelt runs against Herbert Hoover, we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party. We found them more receptive to our issues. We were being pushed out of the Republican Party, and the Republican Party was increasingly ignoring our issues. These defectors, known as Dixiecrats, held a separate convention in Birmingham, Alabama. There, they nominated South Carolina Governor, white supremacist Strom Thurmond, who was a staunch opposer to civil rights, a staunch segregationist. He had a black mistress, okay, staunch opposer of civil rights, to run for president on their states' rights ticket. He was nominated to run for president on the Dixiecrats states' rights ticket. Although Strom Thurmond lost the election to President Harry S. Truman, he still won over 1 million popular votes. Quote, it was the first time since before the Civil War that the South was not solidly Democratic, Goldfield says. And that began the erosion of the Southern influence in the Democratic Party. After that, the majority of the South still continued to vote Democratic because it thought of the Republican Party as the party of Abraham Lincoln and Reconstruction. The big break did not come until President Lyndon Baines Johnson, another Southern Democrat from Texas, signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Though some Democrats had switched to the Republican Party prior to this, that's true, many did, prior to 64 and 65, quote, the defections became a flood. The defections became a flood after Johnson signed these acts. And so the political parties began to reconstitute themselves, Goldfield says. Then in 1964, Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, a Republican, runs for president against Lyndon Baines Johnson, and Barry Goldwater ran on an anti-civil rights platform. So most African Americans naturally voted for Lyndon Baines Johnson because it made sense. The change was not total or immediate. During the late 1960s and early 70s, white Southerners still transitioning away from the Democratic Party, newly enfranchised Black Southerners voted and continued to vote Democratic. And even as Republican Richard Nixon employed a Southern strategy, share this article with Candace Owens because she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. And even as Republican Richard Nixon employed a Southern strategy that appealed to the racism of Southern white voters, former Alabama Governor George Wallace, who wanted segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, ran as a Democrat in the 1972 presidential primaries. Now, he ran for president in 68 and lost. He didn't run as a Democrat in 68. He ran as a third party candidate in 68. He got 46 electoral college votes from 5 former Confederate states in 1968. That was the last time a third party candidate won a single electoral college vote. 1968. This is why voting third party is ridiculous if you actually understand how the electoral college works. It takes 270 electoral college votes to become president-elect. You become president-elect by winning the popular votes in each state. You win the popular votes in each state. You win the electoral college votes in each state by winning the popular vote in each state. Anybody tells you the popular vote does not matter is lying to you. Or they don't read. They haven't read the U.S. Constitution. Popular vote does matter. It's the popular vote per state that matters. And you become president-elect by winning 270 electoral college votes that are awarded by the states. This is before the electoral college votes. The electoral college doesn't vote until the first Monday following the second Wednesday in December, which usually falls in the middle of December. Read this article right here that deals with the history of third-party candidates. And breaks down this history because I can listen to people talking about voting third party. I could tell they don't understand the U.S. Constitution and don't understand the Electoral College. Because if no presidential candidate gets 270, then it goes to the House of Representatives to determine who the president is, and they vote based upon delegation. There are 50 delegations because there are 50 states. Republicans control 26 of the 50 delegations, and they vote on, I think it's January 3rd. They voted because new Congress comes in right about January 3rd or so. So if Donald Trump, if neither Donald Trump or Joe Biden get 270 electoral college votes, Donald Trump could lose the popular vote, lose the electoral college vote, and Republicans can still vote for him to become president because people end up wasting their vote voting for a third-party candidate. And you can still end up with this domestic terrorist back in office. And the U.S. Senate determines who the vice president will be. A romp through history's most successful third-party presidential candidates. A cavalcade of populists, socialists, and segregationists came long before Ralph Nader and Ross Perot, July 3rd, 2023, for Slate.com. Fantastic article. Fantastic historical article. Go check this out, okay? Because I hear these people out here talking, and I can listen to them and tell they don't understand history, don't understand the U.S. Constitution, don't understand the Electoral College, which created the U.S. Constitution. All right, now, Great Society programs take a look at this piece here. Because I got two more I'm going to show you, because we're going to talk about three very quickly here. Because I hear them say things like the marriage rate, the black marriage rate, all this stuff, right? We're going to look at the Great Society programs here. Then I'm going to show you something that none of these black conservatives or the white ones they love want to tell you. Great Society program. This is at history.com, official website of the History Channel. August 28th, 2018. Great Society. In a nutshell, okay, it takes you through, it talks about the Great of what they were. The Great Society was an ambitious series of policy initiatives, legislation, and programs spearheaded by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, with the main goals of ending poverty, reducing crime, abolishing inequality, and improving the environment. This is why black conservatives are against this. They're not really trying to change policies to fight poverty. Okay. They're not trying to abolish inequality. Most of them are against environmental regulations to improve the environment, fight climate change, things of this nature. In May 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson laid out his agenda for a great society during a speech at the University of Michigan. With his eye on re-election that year, Johnson set in motion his Great Society, the largest social reform plan in modern history. Okay, so they talk about riding a wave of empathy and being sworn in after Kennedy was assassinated. They talk about the war on poverty. The war on poverty in March of 1964, Johnson introduced the Office of Economic Opportunity and the Economic Opportunity Act during a special message to Congress. He had hoped to help the underprivileged break the poverty cycle by helping them develop job skills, further their education, and find work. Okay. Now these black conservatives make the Great Society programs seem like it's for lazy people and lazy black people. No, it was to help them develop job skills, further their education, and find work. To do this, President Johnson created Job Corps for 100,000 disadvantaged men. Half would work on conservation projects, and the other will receive education and skills and training, special job training centers. Receive education and skills training in special job training centers. Does this sound like this is something for lazy people? In addition, President Johnson tasked state and local governments with creating work training programs for up to 200,000 men and women. A national work study program was also established to offer 140,000 Americans the chance to go to college who could otherwise not afford it. So the work study program that you have in colleges, okay, this was a special government program where you work and get paid for it while you're in college. All it's a special program that was created by the Great Society programs. Does this sound like this is for lazy people? Other initiatives, the so-called War on Poverty offered were a community action program for people to tackle poverty within their own communities, the ability for the government to recruit and train skilled American volunteers to serve poverty-stricken communities, loans and guarantees for employers who offer jobs to the unemployed. So this was encouraging people to work. Not discouraging people from working. It was encouraging people to work, encouraging people to go to college, encouraging people to get skilled trades training. Funds for farmers to purchase land and establish agricultural co-ops. Help for unemployed parents preparing to enter the workforce. Help for unemployed parents preparing to enter the workforce. Then you had Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid that's created by the Great Society programs. Head Start and education reform was also created by the Great Society programs. The Head Start program started as an 8-week summer camp run by the Office of Economic and Opportunity for 500,000 children ages 3 to 5. Since the program's inception, it has served over 32 million vulnerable children in America. Oh, we can't have Head Start. We can't have lazy 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds. Read the rest of this. Preschool, all that, funded preschool programs, supported school libraries, purchased school textbooks, provided special education services, etc. Okay? Read the rest of this. The Great Society. This is at history.com, official website of the History Channel. Okay, now, so we got that one, and then this one here is from snaptohealth.org. Snaptohealth.org, and it gives a timeline of the history of welfare. A virtual town hall for SNAP. And deals with the history of WIC, all of that right here. And how WIC was overhauled under the Richard Nixon administration. History of WIC, 1968. This is SNAP to Health, a virtual town hall for SNAP, WIC, and nutrition in the United States. History of WIC, going back to 1968, they talk about 1969, President Richard Nixon in December 1969, White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health focused on the problem of malnutrition and hunger due to poverty. Conference recommendations call for special attention to be given to the nutritional needs of low-income pregnant women and preschool children. And they were focusing on white people. Conference recommendations call for special attention to be given to the nutritional needs of low-income pregnant women and preschool children. 1972, on September 26, 1972, an amendment to the Child Nutrition Act of 1966 authorized WIC. The legislation established the Special Supplemental Food Program as a 2-year pilot using Dr. David Page's voucher program as a model. 1973, the program is renamed Special Supplemental Food Program for Women, Infants, and Children, known as WIC. Now, this is under President Richard Nixon. 2 food packages are developed, one for infants and one for children and pregnant or breastfeeding women. Okay, read the rest of this. It takes you throughout history. So they like to talk about the marriage rates and things like that, and black people not getting married and all of that, right? And then they blame the Great Society programs, which were helping largely white people. They blame the Great Society programs and say this broke up the black family. the marriage rates in this country start declining in the 1970s. Really start declining in the 1970s, and you see an increase in the divorce rates. Do you know what law made it easier to get a divorce in the U.S.? Does anybody know? Because these black conservatives are not going to tell you. That was the Family Law Act of 1969. Let's look at this article here from CNN.com. What is no-fault divorce, and why do some conservatives want to get rid of it? For the sake of time, we're going to go right to this right here. What is the history of no-fault divorce in the United States? No-fault divorce was first legalized in California in 1969 by then Governor Ronald Reagan, who would eventually become the first U.S. president who had been divorced. Former President Donald Trump was the second. By 2010, every state had legalized a no-fault divorce option. Governor Ronald Reagan signed into law in 1969 what was known as the Family Law Act of 1969, which made it easier to get a divorce, and you got what's called a no-fault divorce based upon irreconcilable differences. That was signed into law by Governor Ronald Reagan. Versions of that law were adopted by the other states. This is why the divorce rate started falling. It started with Republicans. Before this option, an at-fault divorce was the only recourse for a broken union. This led to complications for couples whose situation, for one reason or another, did not fit the required legal procedure. Couples who wanted a divorce were all but forced by the law to create some sort of fault-based scenario. It was not uncommon for couples to concoct scenarios that would feign adultery, or for one party to move across state lines to fulfill legal requirements for fault claims like abandonment. Migratory divorce, where a couple would move together to a state with no-fault divorce laws, was common. In fact, these methods were so widespread that to a lot of legal experts, a solution like no-fault divorce was necessary to make the system work again. The National Association of Women Lawyers championed no-fault divorce solutions throughout the first half of the 20th century. Read the rest of this article. That goes back to Ronald Reagan, Republican. 1969, the Family Law Act of 1969. So read that article from CNN.com. What is no-fault divorce, and why do some conservatives want to get rid of it? It's from November 27th, 2023. Interesting how these conservatives don't want to tell you all this. So you have them saying the divorce rate, and black families out together, things like this. They want to blame Lyndon Johnson. Don't want to tell you that what really contributed to divorce rates was the Family Law Act of 1969 coming out of California, signed into law by Republican Ronald Reagan. They don't want to talk about how the automation in a lot of these auto plants made it harder for African-American men to get jobs. And that goes back to the article from theroot.com that I showed you. welfare fathers and those persistent myths. Then also this piece here from InTheseTimes.com by Marilyn Katz. This breaks down a lot of that history as well. A half century after Detroit uprising, city still stranded by capitalism and government. This piece right here, which takes you through some of the history of Detroit and the deindustrialization of Detroit. And they talk about how a half century after Detroit uprising, the city still stranded by capitalism and federal government. One of the things they deal with in this article, Marilyn Katz, how federal policy and the big auto industry drove black blight and white flight. And she deals with how the General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler got filthy rich through government contracts during World War II to make military equipment and military vehicles, things like this. The expressways run through African American communities in the 1950s and 60s, wiping out homes, wiping out businesses that we had. Then the new factories are built. The factories are being moved from the inner city out to the suburbs. And when these factories are being built out in the suburbs, they're built on what's called sprawling horizontal campuses. Sprawling horizontal campuses on former farmland in the Detroit suburbs and in Ohio, Indiana, and Canada. Between 1947 and 1958, the Big Three built 25 new factories. None of them were in Detroit. And when they're building these factories, these new factories on these sprawling campuses, they've integrated more automation into the factories, and it eliminated a lot of low-level, entry-level jobs that many of our grandfathers and great grandfathers got when they moved up here from Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, things like this with their families. Taking at face value, this made sense as Detroit then lacked the land for the new horizontally integrated and automated plants. Yet as historian Thomas Segru, and Thomas Segru wrote the book, The Origin of the Urban Crisis. This book right here, The Origin of the Urban Crisis, which deals with a lot of Detroit history, race and inequality in post-war Detroit, The Origin of the Urban Crisis, Professor Thomas Segru. Yet, as historian Thomas Segru and others point out, it was also a way for the auto companies to weaken the UAW, which had won unprecedented victories during the war years, World War II. And with the auto industry went the jobs. In 1960, only Chrysler produced cars in Detroit. Its 60,000 Detroit workers represented only half of those employed just a decade earlier. In less than 2 decades, from 1947 to 1967, Detroit lost 128,000 jobs in the auto industry alone. Okay, read the rest of this article here. Then they like to talk about the war on drugs and the 94 crime bill and all this stuff, right? You know when the war on drugs started? So I thought I got to go to, I think that's, is that on the Black resistance movements? I think it is. The war on drugs was declared June 17th, 1971. by a president named Richard Nixon, who ran for president on the platform of law and order, which means protect white people and lock up African Americans. That's basically what law and order means. He ran as a backlash to the civil rights movement and Black Power movement and the rebellions taking place across the country. He ran as a backlash largely to the anti-poverty programs, Great Society programs. He ran on discontinuing some and overhauling others. But he ran as a backlash to all of that. There was the article from Harper's Bazaar Weekly, and it was from 2016. It's called Legalize It All. It's called Legalize It All. And in the article, and I want to pull this up here, they talk about how they deal with the origins of the war on drugs and Richard Nixon. And it dealt with an interview that John Ehrlichman, who was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor, the interview he did with a journalist named Dan Baum in 1994. All the news outlets had stories about this. And John Ehrlichman talked about what the war on drugs was really about and how it targeted African Americans and the anti-war effort, and the hippies. This piece right here, AtlantaBlackStar.com has an article on this. I was trying to bring up my slides also because I have this in some of my presentations. Nixon advisor said the war on drugs was a manufactured lie designed to target and disrupt the Black community. March 23rd, 2016, AtlantaBlackStar.com. There's a picture of John Ehrlichman and Richard Nixon. Picture from 1972. The name of the article from Harper's Magazine was called Legalize It All. I'm going to try to pull up that piece because they go through and really explain this. I had to restart my PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, let me show you this here. I'm going to go to a slide from one of my presentations because I did a lecture back in 2016 dealing with the history of the war on drugs. So I did a lot of research on this. And it was in April 2016 that the story came out. Legalize It All, How to Win the War. In Legalize It All, the April 2016 cover story of Harper's Magazine, journalist Dan Baum let's go to this. Journalist Dan Baum, B-A-U-M, author of Smoke and Mirrors, The War on Drugs and the Politics of Failure, discusses his 1994 interview with John Ehrlichman. Now, John Ehrlichman died in 1999. He was President Richard Nixon's chief domestic policy advisor and had spent 18 months behind bars for conspiracy to obstruct justice and perjury as a result of the Watergate cover-up. Read the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Nixon advisor said the war on drugs was a manufactured lie designed to target and disrupt the Black community. That's from March 23rd, 2016. March 23rd, 2016. How did the United States entangle itself in a policy of drug prohibition that has yielded so much misery and so few good results? Americans have been criminalizing psychoactive substances since San Francisco's anti-opium 1875 law that targeted Chinese men working on railroads. But it was John Ehrlichman's boss, Richard Nixon, who declared the first war on drugs and set the country on the widely punitive and counterproductive path it still pursues. I had tracked Ehrlichman, who had been Nixon's domestic policy advisor, to an engineering firm in Atlanta where he was working on minority recruitment. Now, this is quoting the article from theroot.com right here. Former Nixon aide claims war on drugs invented to suppress Black people. And they're citing the article from Harper's Weekly. John Ehrlichman said what the war on drugs was about. He said, "We knew we could not make it illegal to be either against the war, or be Black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night in the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." So I'm waiting for some of these Black conservatives to tell you what Richard Nixon did in his war on drugs. Because the U.S. prison population quadrupled from 1970 to 1993. It went from 300,000 in 1970 to 1.3 million in 1993. I don't know why they're not telling you this. I just can't figure it out. All right. So also, you can read this piece here dealing with Jim Crow laws and the history of Jim Crow laws. Let's see, this is a good one here. Yeah, right here. Jim Crow laws from history.com. This here deals with the history of Jim Crow laws and what they were in the time period. So you can read this. Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation, named after a Black minstrel show character. That Black minstrel show character was created by T.D. Rice, Thomas Dartmouth Rice, right around 1828, 1829. Comes from the story goes, he saw a male slave tending to animals, either a teenage male, something like that. He was singing the song, "Turn around, jump around, I jump just so. Every time I turn around, I jump Jim Crow." So it was named after a black minstrel show character. T.D. Rice creates his Jim Crow character, puts on black face, tattered, torn clothing, and adopts a Southern dialect and performs his Jim Crow character on stage. This becomes the birth of the minstrel shows. The birth of the minstrel shows. Thomas Dartmouth Rice is known as the father of minstrelsy and the minstrel shows. The laws, which existed for about 100 years from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, and get education or other opportunities. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. Then they go into the history of the black codes, etc. Okay, so read this here, dealing with Jim Crow laws. That's at history.com. There's also another really good piece that deals with how, which one is this one? Yeah. How Jim Crow laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. This one right here, how Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. In the wake of the passage of the 15th Amendment and Reconstruction, several Southern states enacted laws that restricted Black Americans' access to voting. This is from August 8th, 2023. It was last updated. So read this one here.
Welcome to Sapphire.
Takes you through history. Talks about the 15th Amendment, all of this. Mississippi State Constitution, Mississippi State Convention, 1890. Right here, we came here to exclude the Negro. Deals with all this history. The impact of the legislation was swift. By 1910, registered voters among African Americans dropped to 15% in Georgia and under 2% in both Alabama and Mississippi, according to historian Donald Neiman in his book Promises to Keep, African Americans and the Constitutional Order, 1776 to present. Then you had Williams versus Mississippi, U.S. Supreme Court case of 1898 that challenged the poll taxes, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the state poll taxes in Mississippi, the disenfranchisement clauses, grandfather clauses, and literacy tests on the basis that the new Constitution did not discriminate between the races, and it has been shown that their actual administration was not evil, only that evil was possible under them. This is what the U.S. Supreme Court ruled when we challenged these laws. This is 2 years after Plessy versus Ferguson. This is Williams versus Mississippi, 1898 U.S. Supreme Court case. All right, look, that's going to do it for us. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can support the African History Network $, the AHN Show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Join me in Detroit at the Juneteenth events, the 14th, 15th, and 16th. Juneteenth, Jubilee, det.com. Register for my online classes. Next class is Saturday, June 22nd, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Register here. As soon as you register, you can watch the previous classes that are archived, download a lesson plan that I put together, register for my new class. Starts Sunday, June 23rd, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Black resistance movements, Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. Click here to register for the full class. Click here to register for the bundle for both courses, okay? This content is PG-13. You can use this with your children. It's not overly graphic or anything like that, okay? All right. As you get out of here, remember at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next time. Peace.